The sun beat down mercilessly on Teresa Anderson's wagon as it rattled along the dusty trail high above the Rattlesnake Ravine. She had been traveling for days, her possessions piled precariously around her, sweat dampening her calico dress as she fled the life she once knew in St. Louis. It was 1876, and the promise of a new beginning in Fort Benton, Montana Territory, had drawn her westward like so many others seeking fortune and freedom in the aftermath of the Civil War. What she hadn't counted on was the treacherous mountain pass that now threatened to claim both her life and the dreams she carried. The first sign of trouble came with a sharp crack, the wooden wheel of her wagon splintering against a jagged rock. Teresa barely had time to gasp before the entire wagon lurched sideways, tipping toward the ravine's edge. She clutched desperately at the wooden seat, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as the wagon teetered on the brink of disaster. Then, with a sickening lurch, it began to slide. Teresa leapt from the wagon, her body tumbling through brush and stone as she rolled down the ravine's steep slope. Pain exploded through her ankle as she crashed into a rocky outcropping halfway down. Above her, her wagon continued its descent, splintering against the rocks before coming to rest in pieces at the ravine bottom, her worldly possessions scattered like fallen leaves across the rocky terrain. "Help!" she called, her voice thin in the vast openness. "Is anyone there? Please help me." But only the wind answered, whistling through the ravine as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape. Lucas Westfield had been trailing astray from his small cattle herd when he heard the crash. Standing in his stirrups, he peered across the rocky terrain, spotting the overturned wagon in the distance. Without hesitation, he urged his horse forward, dust kicking up behind them as they raced toward the scene. "Hello," he called, dismounting at the ravine's edge. That's when he spotted her, a woman in a dusty blue dress, clinging to an outcropping about 30 feet down the ravine wall. "Madam, are you hurt?" Teresa looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun to see a tall figure silhouetted against the sky. His broad-brimmed hat and the rope coiled at his saddle marked him unmistakably as a cowboy. "My ankle," she called back, her voice trembling. "I think it's broken. I can't climb up." Lucas surveyed the situation quickly. The ravine walls were steep and unstable. Attempting to climb down might send them both tumbling to the bottom. "Hold tight," he called. "I'm going to get you out of there." Working swiftly, Lucas uncoiled his lasso from his saddle horn. The rope was strong, designed to hold struggling cattle, but he'd need more than just the rope to help the woman safely. Glancing around, he spotted a sturdy pine growing near the ravine edge. With practiced hands, he secured one end of the rope around the tree trunk, creating an anchor point. "I'm sending the rope down to you," he called. "Can you tie it around your waist?" Teresa watched as the loop of rope descended toward her. "I think so," she replied, reaching for it with shaking hands. The pain in her ankle was excruciating, and she felt lightheaded from the fall, but determination kept her conscious. She managed to secure the rope around her waist, tugging it tight. "It's done." Lucas tested the rope, then positioned himself to begin pulling. "I'm going to lift you up," he called. "Just hold onto the rope and try not to put weight on your injured foot." With a deep breath, he began to pull, muscles straining against the weight. Teresa was not a small woman, her frame solid and sturdy from years of hard work, and the angle made the task even more difficult. Sweat beaded on Lucas's brow as he heaved on the rope, his boots digging into the rocky soil for purchase. "I'm too heavy," Teresa called up, seeing his struggle. "You'll never be able to pull me up alone." "Nonsense," Lucas grunted, adjusting his grip. "I've pulled stubborn bulls heavier than you. Just hang on tight." Thinking quickly, Lucas looped the rope around his saddle horn, then whistled to his horse. The well-trained animal responded immediately, stepping backward slowly as Lucas guided it, effectively creating a pulley system with the added strength of the horse. Inch by inch, Teresa rose up the ravine wall, her hands gripping the rope so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she finally reached the top, Lucas grabbed her arms and pulled her over the edge to safety. She collapsed against him, trembling from exertion and pain. For a moment, they remained that way, Teresa clutching the front of his dusty shirt, Lucas's arms steadying her as they both caught their breath. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up into his face for the first time. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the shadow of his hat brim. A day's growth of beard covered his jaw, and a lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. "Lucas Westfield," he said, his voice gentler now. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here." "Teresa Anderson," she replied, wincing as she tried to put weight on her injured ankle. "I was headed to Fort Benton. My wagon is kindling now," Lucas finished, glancing down at the wreckage. "But you're alive, and that's what matters. Let me take a look at that ankle." Carefully, he helped her sit on a nearby rock, then knelt to examine her injury. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused from ranch work. "It's swollen bad, but I don't think it's broken, just a nasty sprain." He looked up at her, his expression serious. "You won't be walking on it any time soon, Miss Anderson." Teresa's eyes filled with tears as the full impact of her situation hit her. "Everything I owned was in that wagon. My clothes, my money, the deed to the property I purchased." Her voice broke. "I don't know what I'm going to do now." Lucas stood, brushing the dust from his jeans. "First thing we're going to do is get you somewhere safe. My ranch isn't much, but there's a spare room and plenty of food." He whistled again, and his horse trotted over obediently. "Then tomorrow, I'll come back and see what can be salvaged from your wagon." "I can't impose, it's not an imposition," Lucas interrupted. "It's what neighbors do out here. The West isn't like back east. Out here, helping each other isn't charity, it's survival." Before she could protest further, Lucas lifted her easily into his arms and set her on his horse. The sudden proximity made Teresa's breath catch. It had been years since a man had been so close to her, and never one as kind-eyed as this cowboy who had just saved her life. Lucas mounted behind her, reaching around to take the reins. "Hold tight," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." As they rode toward his ranch, the sun beginning to set over the Montana landscape, Teresa found herself acutely aware of the strong arms encircling her, the steady beat of his heart against her back. She had come west, seeking a new beginning, never imagining it would start at the bottom of a ravine with a cowboy pulling her to safety. Lucas's ranch came into view just as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. "Someone's waiting for you," Teresa observed, noting the welcoming light. Lucas chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "That'd be Mrs. Holly's. She comes by twice a week to help with cooking and cleaning. Good thing today was one of her days." As they approached, the cabin door swung open, and an elderly woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lucas returning with a woman in his arms. "Land sakes, Lucas Westfield, what have you gone and done now?" she called, her tone more curious than accusatory. "Found a traveler in need of assistance, Mrs. Holly's," Lucas replied, reining his horse to a stop before the porch. "Miss Teresa Anderson, this is Mrs. Edith Holly's, the finest cook in Montana Territory, and the woman who keeps me from living like a complete savage." Mrs. Holly snorted at the introduction, but moved quickly to help as Lucas dismounted, and then gently lifted Teresa from the saddle. "The poor dear's injured," she noted, taking in Teresa's disheveled appearance and the pain evident in her face. "Bring her inside, Lucas. I've got stew on the stove and plenty of hot water for cleaning up." The inside of Lucas's cabin was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table, and several chairs, with doors leading to what Teresa assumed were bedrooms. Everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's quarters, though she suspected Mrs. Holly's had much to do with that. Lucas set her carefully in a cushioned chair by the fire. Mrs. Holly's, Miss Anderson's wagon went over the edge at Rattlesnake Ravine. Her ankle's badly sprained and she's lost most of her possessions. "Oh, you poor child," Mrs. Holly's clucked sympathetically. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed, then we'll see to that ankle." She turned to Lucas. "Go fetch my healing salve from my basket and some clean bandages from the cupboard." As Lucas moved to follow her instructions, Mrs. Holly's leaned closer to Teresa. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear. Lucas Westfield is the most honorable man in these parts. You're in good hands." Teresa managed a weak smile, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if Mr. Westfield hadn't come along when he did." "The good Lord works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Holly's replied with a knowing smile. "Now, let's get some food in you while Lucas tends to your horse." The stew was hearty and delicious, filling Teresa's empty stomach and bringing warmth back to her chilled body. As she ate, Mrs. Holly's bustled around, preparing a bed in what she called the spare room and gathering clean clothes for Teresa to wear. "These might be a bit large," Mrs. Holly said, placing a folded nightgown and dress on the table. "They belonged to Lucas's sister when she visited last summer." "She's a tall girl, like yourself. He has family nearby?" Teresa asked, curious about the man who had saved her. "His sister Elizabeth lives in Helena with her husband and children," Mrs. Holly's explained. "His parents passed years ago back in Kansas. Lucas came out here after the war, looking for a fresh start like so many young men." She paused, studying Teresa's face. "And what about you, dear? What brings a young woman out to these parts alone?" Teresa hesitated, not quite ready to share her full story. "A chance for independence," she said simply. "I purchased property in Fort Benton, sight unseen. I was planning to open a bakery." Mrs. Holly's nodded approvingly. "A good trade for a woman with sense and skill. Don't you worry, we'll figure something out about your situation." When Lucas returned, he helped Mrs. Holly's tend to Teresa's ankle, applying the healing salve and wrapping it carefully in clean bandages. His touch was gentle, his large hands moving with surprising dexterity. "You'll need to stay off this for at least a week," he advised, tying off the bandage. "Any walking you do should be minimal and with support." "A week," Teresa's heart sank. "But I need to get to Fort Benton. The man I purchased the property from is expecting me." "I'll ride into town tomorrow and send word about what happened," Lucas offered. "What's the man's name?" "Edward Thornton," Teresa replied. "He owns the general store." Lucas's expression darkened slightly at the name, but he nodded. "I know Thornton. I'll speak with him personally." After Mrs. Holly's helped Teresa wash up and change into the borrowed nightgown, Lucas carried her to the spare room, a small but comfortable space with a narrow bed, dresser, and window overlooking the valley. Moonlight streamed through the glass, casting silver shadows across the floor. "You'll be safe here," Lucas assured her as he set her gently on the bed. "Mrs. Holly's will stay the night in the other room. If you need anything, just call out." Teresa looked up at him, emotion tightening her throat. Mr. Westfield, Lucas, I don't know how to thank you properly." He smiled, and in the moonlight his features softened. "No thanks needed, Miss Anderson. Just get some rest." He hesitated at the door. "Tomorrow, after I speak with Thornton, I'll head back to the ravine and see what can be salvaged from your wagon." "You don't have to. I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently. "I want to. Good night, Miss Anderson. Teresa," she corrected. "Please call me Teresa." His smile widened. "Good night, Teresa." As the door closed behind him, Teresa sank back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Her ankle throbbed dully beneath the bandages, a constant reminder of how close she had come to disaster. Yet despite the pain and the loss of her possessions, a strange sense of peace settled over her. Perhaps it was the safety of the cabin, or the kindness of Lucas and Mrs. Hollies, or simply the sheer relief of survival, but for the first time since leaving St. Louis, Teresa felt that perhaps things might turn out all right after all. Morning came with golden light filtering through the window, and the aroma of coffee and frying bacon. Teresa woke slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Her ankle still ached, but the swelling seemed to have subsided somewhat overnight. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Hollies entering with a tray. "Good morning, dear. Thought you might like some breakfast before I help you dress." "That's very kind, thank you," Teresa replied, pushing herself up to a sitting position. The tray held a plate of bacon and eggs, fresh biscuits with butter and honey, and a steaming cup of coffee. "Lucas rode out at first light," Mrs. Hollies informed her as she set the tray across Teresa's lap. "Said he wanted to check the ravine before heading into town. That man never could sit still when there was work to be done." As Teresa ate, Mrs. Hollies chatted companionably about the ranch and the surrounding area. Lucas had purchased the property 5 years earlier, she explained, when it was little more than a run-down shack and overgrazed pasture. Through hard work and determination, he had transformed it into a modest but successful cattle operation. "Not that it's been easy," Mrs. Hollies added, helping Teresa into the borrowed dress after breakfast. "The winter of '74 nearly broke him, losing half his herd in that terrible blizzard. And then there was trouble with the banker in town." "Trouble?" Teresa asked, curious despite herself. Mrs. Hollies' lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not my story to tell. Let's just say there are folks in Fort Benton who'd rather see Lucas fail than succeed." She brightened, patting Teresa's hand. "But he's a fighter, that one, never gives up no matter how steep the odds." The day passed slowly as Teresa remained confined to the cabin. Mrs. Hollies provided her with a book from Lucas's small collection, a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, and busied herself with household chores. By mid-afternoon, Teresa had grown restless enough to attempt standing, using a wooden walking stick Mrs. Hollies had found for her. "Careful now," the older woman cautioned as Teresa took a tentative step. "Lucas will have my hide if you worsen that injury." "I can't stay in bed forever," Teresa replied, grimacing as she put weight on her ankle. "And I need to start thinking about what comes next. I can't impose on Mr. Westfield's hospitality indefinitely." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollies scoffed. "This place could use a woman's touch beyond my occasional visits, and Lucas could use—" She trailed off, a knowing glint in her eye. Before Teresa could question her meaning, the sound of hoofbeats approached the cabin. Mrs. Hollies moved to the window. "Speak of the devil," she murmured, "and he's not alone." Teresa hobbled to the window to see Lucas dismounting from his horse. Behind him, a wagon driven by an older man came to a stop in the yard. The wagon bed was loaded with items she recognized: her trunk, some furniture pieces, and several crates that had survived the crash. "Oh," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "He found my things, Mrs. Hollis patted her shoulder. "Told you he was a good man." Lucas entered the cabin, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His face was smudged with dirt, his shirt torn at the shoulder, but his eyes lit up when he saw Teresa standing. "You shouldn't be on that ankle yet," he admonished, though his tone was gentle. "You found my belongings," Teresa said, ignoring his concern. "I can't believe it." Lucas nodded, setting his hat on a hook by the door. "Some things were damaged beyond repair, but I managed to recover quite a bit. Your trunk was intact, landed on some bushes that cushioned the fall, and I found this wedged between some rocks." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. Teresa recognized it immediately, the deed to her property in Fort Benton. "The deed? Oh, Lucas, thank you." Without thinking, she stepped forward, forgetting her injury. Her ankle gave way, and she would have fallen if Lucas hadn't moved quickly to catch her. For a moment, they stood there, his arms around her waist, her hands on his shoulders, their faces inches apart. Teresa felt heat rise to her cheeks as she became acutely aware of his proximity, of the strength in his arms and the warmth of his breath against her face. Lucas cleared his throat, helping her back to a chair. "You need to be more careful," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "That ankle needs time to heal properly." Mrs. Hollis watched the exchange with poorly concealed amusement. "I'll go help Mr. Patterson unload the wagon," she announced, slipping out the door and leaving them alone. "Did you speak with Mr. Thornton?" Teresa asked, trying to regain her composure. Lucas's expression darkened. "I did." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Teresa, there's something you should know about Edward Thornton. He's not the most honest businessman in Fort Benton." Teresa frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The property he sold you, it's not what you think. The building is there, yes, but it's in terrible condition. The roof leaks, the foundation is cracked, and the previous tenant left because rats had taken over the storage room. But in his letters, he described it as newly renovated with modern amenities," Teresa protested, her heart sinking. "Thornton has a habit of embellishing the truth when selling to out-of-towners," Lucas replied grimly. "And he was less than sympathetic when I told him about your accident. Said the sale was final, regardless of your circumstances." Teresa's hands clenched in her lap, anger replacing disappointment. "I spent nearly all my savings on that property." "I figured as much," Lucas said. "That's why I made him an offer." "An offer?" Teresa looked up, confused. "I offered to buy the property from him at the same price you paid, minus a reasonable sum for the repairs needed," Lucas explained. "He wasn't happy about it, but when I mentioned bringing the matter before Judge Hammond, who happens to be a friend of mine, Thornton suddenly became more agreeable." Teresa stared at him in disbelief. "You bought my property, but why would you do that?" Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Because it wasn't right what he did to you, and because—" He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "Because I think you deserve a fair chance at the new start you came here for." "I can't accept such charity," Teresa began, her pride bristling despite her gratitude. "It's not charity," Lucas interrupted firmly. "It's an investment. Fort Benton could use a good bakery, and that building, once repaired, would be perfect for it. I'm proposing a partnership. I provide the building and the capital for repairs. You provide the skill and run the business. We split the profits." Teresa blinked, taken aback by the unexpected proposal. "A partnership? But you hardly know me." A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, warming his eyes. "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to travel west alone, determined enough to pursue your dreams despite obstacles, and stubborn enough to argue with the man who just saved your life. Those are qualities I admire in a business partner. Put that way, the offer was difficult to refuse. Still, Teresa hesitated. Why would you do this for a stranger? For a moment, Lucas was silent, his gaze steady on her face. Maybe I'm tired of being alone out here, he said finally, his voice quiet. Maybe helping you feels like the right thing to do, or maybe. He smiled again, a touch of self-deprecation in the expression. Maybe I just have a weakness for women who fall into ravines. Despite herself, Teresa laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? But I insist on a proper business agreement with terms clearly stated. I wouldn't have it any other way, Lucas agreed, extending his hand. Partners, Miss Anderson. Teresa took his hand, noting the calluses against her palm, the strength in his grip. Partners, Mr. Westfield. As they shook on their agreement, Teresa couldn't help but feel that something else had been sealed between them, something beyond a mere business arrangement. The way Lucas's hand lingered in hers, the warmth in his eyes that had nothing to do with business prospects, suggested possibilities she hardly dared consider. Outside, Mrs. Hollis directed Mr. Patterson in unloading the wagon, a satisfied smile on her face as she glanced through the window at the two figures by the fire. Some things, she thought to herself, were meant to be even if they began with a fall into a ravine and a cowboy with a rope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity, despite Teresa's injured ankle. True to his word, Lucas rode into Fort Benton regularly, overseeing the initial repairs on the building that would become her bakery. Each evening, he returned with progress reports, sometimes bringing small gifts: a bolt of calico from the dry goods store, a set of baking tins from the hardware merchant, wildflowers gathered along the trail. "The roof is finally watertight," he announced one evening, settling into a chair across from Teresa at the dinner table. "And I hired Wilson's boy to catch the rats. Place should be vermin-free by next week." "How romantic, Mrs. Hollis commented dryly as she served up plates of roast beef and potatoes. "Nothing says welcome to Montana like rat catching." Lucas shot her a warning look, but Teresa laughed. Over the days of her convalescence, she had grown comfortable with the easy banter between Lucas and the older woman. Mrs. Hollis had taken to visiting daily instead of twice weekly, ostensibly to help Teresa while her ankle healed, though Teresa suspected the woman simply enjoyed having another female to talk with. "I'm grateful for any progress," Teresa assured them. "And my ankle is much better. I should be able to see the place myself soon." "Not until Doc Miller says so," Lucas replied firmly. "He'll be by tomorrow to check on you." Teresa sighed but didn't argue. The town doctor had visited several days after her accident, pronouncing her ankle sprained but not broken, and prescribing at least 3 weeks of limited movement. The forced inactivity had been frustrating, but it had also given her time to plan for the bakery, and she had to admit to get to know Lucas better. They had fallen into an easy routine. Mornings began with breakfast together, before Lucas rode out to tend his cattle or visit Fort Benton. Teresa would spend the day helping Mrs. Hollis with light chores, working on her baking plans, or simply sitting on the porch, watching the Montana landscape and breathing in the clean mountain air. Evenings were her favorite. Lucas would return, and after dinner, they would sit by the fire, talking until the embers burned low. She learned that he had fought for the Union in the war, returning home to Kansas to find his parents' farm struggling. After helping them stabilize the property, he had headed west, working as a ranch hand until he saved enough to purchase his own land. He spoke little of the war itself, but Teresa sensed the shadows it had left in him the way he sometimes stared into the distance, lost in memories he preferred not to share. In turn, she told him about her life in St. Louis, her father's bakery where she had learned her craft, his death from influenza 3 years earlier, her mother's subsequent remarriage to a man who had little use for his new stepdaughter. She described her dream of owning her own bakery, of building something that was truly hers. "My stepfather thought it was foolish," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "He said a woman had no business owning property or running an establishment alone, that I should focus on finding a husband instead." Lucas snorted. "Sounds like a man afraid of a woman's independence." "He offered to invest in the bakery if I agreed to let him manage it," Teresa continued, her fingers tightening around her cup of tea. "When I refused, he made it clear I was no longer welcome in his home. So I sold my father's pocket watch, the only valuable thing I had, and used the money to buy the property in Fort Benton." "Your father would be proud," Lucas said quietly. "Taking such a risk for something you believe in, that takes courage." Teresa glanced at him, touched by his understanding. "What about your parents? Are they proud of what you've built here?" A sad smile crossed Lucas's face. "My father passed 2 winters ago. Mother followed last spring. But yes, I think they would be proud. My father always said the measure of a man is not in what he owns, but in what he builds and who he helps along the way." "Wise words," Teresa murmured. "Words I try to live by," Lucas agreed, his gaze meeting hers in the fading light. Something passed between them, then an understanding, a connection that needed no words. Teresa felt her heart quicken, and for a moment she thought Lucas might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and stood. "Getting chilly," he said, offering her his arm to help her rise. "We should head inside before your ankle stiffens up." That night, lying in bed, Teresa found herself thinking about Lucas, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had come west seeking independence, not romance, yet she couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward the cowboy who had pulled her from the ravine. But was she ready to risk her heart again, after working so hard to secure her independence? And did Lucas feel the same? Or was his kindness merely the neighborly assistance he would offer any stranger in need? With such thoughts swirling through her mind, Teresa drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of ravines and ropes, of falling and being caught in strong arms that promised safety. Dr. Miller's visit the next day brought welcome news. Teresa's ankle had healed well enough for her to begin putting more weight on it, though he cautioned against long walks or standing for extended periods. "Another week of taking it easy," he advised as he repacked his medical bag. "Then you can think about more strenuous activities." "Like seeing my bakery?" Teresa asked eagerly. The doctor chuckled. "Yes, though I'd suggest a short visit at first, and no lifting or carrying heavy items yet." After he left, Teresa could hardly contain her excitement. "Lucas, can we go to Fort Benton tomorrow, just for a short while to see the building? Please." Lucas, who had been listening to the doctor's instructions with careful attention, looked hesitant. "Are you sure you're ready for the journey? It's a bumpy road in places." "I've been cooped up for weeks," Teresa pleaded. "I need to see the place to start planning properly, and I promise to be careful." Lucas studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll take the buggy. It'll be easier on your ankle than riding horseback. But we'll keep the visit short, and you'll tell me immediately if the pain worsens." Teresa agreed readily, already anticipating the trip. That evening she asked Mrs. Hollis to help her wash and set her hair, and she carefully mended the best of her salvaged dresses, a deep blue calico with white piping that her mother had always said brought out the color of her eyes. "My, don't you look lovely, Mrs. Hollis commented the next morning as Teresa emerged from her room, dressed in the freshly pressed blue dress, her dark hair arranged in soft waves around her face. Almost as if you were trying to impress someone special. Teresa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I simply want to look presentable for my first visit to town," she replied, avoiding the older woman's knowing gaze. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Holly said, patting her arm. "And I'm sure Lucas won't even notice how that color brings out your eyes or how nicely that dress fits your figure." Before Teresa could formulate a response, the cabin door opened and Lucas stepped inside, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest. He stopped short at the sight of her, his eyes widening slightly. "Good morning," Teresa greeted him, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Morning," he replied, seeming to recover himself. "You look ready for town." Mrs. Holly's made a small sound that might have been a stifled laugh, busying herself with packing a basket. "I've prepared some food for your journey," she announced. "No sense arriving in town hungry." The ride to Fort Benton took just over an hour, the buggy following a winding trail through rolling hills and across a shallow creek. Lucas pointed out landmarks along the way, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear, a distant mountain range named for a long-ago trapper, the spot where the stagecoach had once been ambushed by road agents. "Is it dangerous?" Teresa asked, glancing around at the seemingly peaceful landscape. "Living so far from town," Lucas shrugged. "It can be. Nature has its own dangers, blizzards in winter, drought in summer, the occasional mountain lion, and there are still some unsavory characters around, though less than in the early days, but mostly it's just quiet and lonely." The question slipped out before Teresa could consider its implications. Lucas was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "but there's peace in solitude too. A man can hear his own thoughts out here, away from the noise of others." "And what are your thoughts telling you lately?" Teresa asked softly. He glanced at her then, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Lately, they've been telling me that perhaps too much solitude isn't good for a man's soul." His hand shifted on the reins, briefly covering hers where it rested on the seat between them. "That some noises are worth listening to." The moment hung between them, fragile and full of possibility, until the buggy hit a rut in the road, jolting them both and breaking the connection. Lucas returned his attention to driving, and Teresa found herself looking out at the landscape, her heart beating a little faster than before. Fort Benton appeared on the horizon shortly after a cluster of buildings nestled along the banks of the Missouri River. As they drew closer, Teresa could make out the details. The sturdy log structure of the fort itself, now serving more as a trading post than a military installation, the various businesses lining the main street, the church spire rising above the surrounding buildings, and the busy riverfront where steamboats docked, bringing goods and passengers from the east. "It's bigger than I expected," Teresa remarked as they entered the town proper, passing wagons and riders on the busy street. "It's grown considerably in recent years," Lucas replied. "The steamboat traffic brings steady commerce, and the cattle drives heading north to Canada come through here. It's a good place for a bakery, plenty of hungry travelers passing through, and the locals would appreciate fresh bread and sweets that don't come from Mrs. Finch's kitchen." "Mrs. Finch, the hotel owner's wife," Lucas explained with a grimace. "She does the cooking, but baking isn't her strong suit. Her biscuits could serve as doorstops." Teresa laughed, already envisioning the opportunity before her. "Then I shall have to ensure my bread is light and my pastries delicate to show the good people of Fort Benton what they've been missing." Lucas guided the buggy down the main street, nodding to various townspeople as they passed. Teresa noticed that while some returned his greeting warmly, others merely glanced at him with expressions ranging from indifference to outright suspicion. She remembered Mrs. Holly's mentioning that Lucas had enemies in town, but decided not to question him about it just yet. They turned onto a side street near the river, and Lucas pulled the buggy to a stop in front of a modest two-story building with a wide front window. The lower level appeared to be a storefront, while the upper floor presumably contained living quarters. A fresh coat of whitewash covered the exterior walls and new shingles gleamed on the roof. "Here we are," Lucas announced. "Your bakery." Teresa's heart leapt at the words. Despite everything, the accident, the loss of her possessions, the deception by Thornton, she had made it. This was the beginning of her dream. Lucas helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Ready to see inside?" Teresa nodded, too emotional to speak. She leaned on her walking stick as Lucas unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing the interior space. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating a room that was clean but bare, save for a sturdy counter along one wall and a small wood-burning stove in the corner. The floor had been recently swept, and the walls freshly plastered. "It's not much yet," Lucas said, watching her face for a reaction. "But the structure is sound now, and there's room for everything you'll need. Through that door is a storage area rat-free, as promised, and upstairs are 2 rooms that can serve as living quarters." Teresa moved slowly through the space, her mind already arranging at tables for customers near the window, display cases for pastries along the counter, perhaps a larger baking oven against the back wall. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face Lucas with tears in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect. I can't believe you did all this in just 2 weeks." Lucas looked pleased but uncomfortable with her praise. "I had help, and it still needs work, proper baking equipment, furniture, supplies." "We'll manage it," Teresa assured him, impulsively reaching for his hand. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes warm as they met hers. "You're welcome, Teresa." The moment stretched between them, the air suddenly thick with unspoken feelings. Teresa found herself acutely aware of their joined hands, of Lucas's proximity, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, and realized with a flutter of anticipation that she wanted him to. The spell was broken by a sharp knock on the open door. They stepped apart quickly as a tall, well-dressed man entered the shop, his expression hardening at the sight of Lucas. "Westfield," he greeted coldly. "I heard you were in town." "Thornton," Lucas replied, his posture stiffening. "I didn't expect to see you today." Teresa recognized the name immediately, Edward Thornton, the man who had sold her the decrepit property under false pretenses. Up close, he was less impressive than his letters had suggested, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and small, calculating eyes. "I wanted to see what you were doing with my former property," Thornton said, his gaze shifting to Teresa. "And to meet the young lady who came all this way based on our correspondence. Miss Anderson, I presume." Teresa straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "Mr. Thornton, I must say, your description of this building's condition was somewhat exaggerated." Thornton smiled thinly. "The territory is full of opportunities for those willing to put in the work, Miss Anderson. I merely provided you with such an opportunity." "After charging her for renovations that were never made," Lucas interjected, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "A misunderstanding, nothing more," Thornton dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Besides, it all worked out for the best, didn't it? Miss Anderson has her bakery and you, Westfield, have, what exactly, a business partner? Or something more personal?" The implication hung in the air, its insult clear. Teresa felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Lucas stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "I think you should leave, Thornton," he said quietly. "Miss Anderson and I have work to discuss." Thornton seemed unperturbed by Lucas's anger. "Of course. I just wanted to welcome Fort Benton's newest business owner properly." He tipped his hat to Teresa. "Good day, Miss Anderson. I hope your venture proves successful despite your choice of partner." After he left, the room felt smaller, as if his presence had somehow tainted the space. Lucas remained tense, his jaw clenched as he stared at the doorway. "I take it there's history between you two," Teresa observed, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Lucas exhaled slowly. "You could say that." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "You should know what you're getting into, partnering with me." Not everyone in town thinks highly of Lucas Westfield. "Because," Teresa prompted gently, "because 3 years ago, Thornton's bank tried to foreclose on my ranch during a harsh winter when I lost cattle and couldn't make a payment," Lucas explained, his voice flat. "I discovered he had deliberately changed the terms of my loan without informing me illegal, but hard to prove. When I confronted him publicly, it caused quite a stir. Judge Hammond ruled in my favor eventually, but Thornton has powerful friends. He's been trying to ruin me ever since." "That's terrible," Teresa said, instinctively reaching for his arm. "Is that why some people in town seemed cold toward you?" Lucas nodded grimly. "Thornton spread rumors that I threatened him, that I was unstable after the war. Some believed him, others didn't. It's why I keep to myself mostly." "And now I've dragged you back into town business," Teresa realized with dismay. "Lucas, I'm so sorry. If you want to withdraw from our partnership—" "No," he interrupted firmly, taking her hands in his. "Teresa, this is important to you, and it's become important to me too. I won't let Thornton's pettiness change that." His expression softened. "Besides, Fort Benton could use a good bakery, and I—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I've enjoyed having you at the ranch, more than I probably should admit." The confession, simple as it was, made Teresa's heart skip. "I've enjoyed being there," she replied softly. "More than I expected to." Something shifted in Lucas's eyes, a warmth, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned closer. Teresa felt her breath catch as his lips met hers, gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. She answered by stepping into his embrace, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've been wanting to do that since I pulled you up from that ravine," he admitted with a soft laugh. "I'm glad you waited," Teresa replied, smiling up at him. "I was a mess that day." "You were beautiful," he countered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Brave and determined, even hanging from a rope 30 feet up a ravine wall." Teresa blushed, unused to such direct compliments. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "With the bakery? With us?" Lucas took a step back, giving her space but keeping hold of her hands. "The bakery opens as planned as soon as we can get the equipment and supplies you need. As for us—" His expression grew serious. "I won't rush you, Teresa. You came west seeking independence, not a relationship. I respect that, but I'd like the chance to court you properly if you're willing." The offer touched Teresa deeply. Most men would have assumed that a kiss granted them rights, but Lucas was offering her choice, respecting her dreams even as he expressed his own feelings. "I'd like that," she said simply. "Very much." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the Montana hills, warm and full of promise. "Then let's get you back to the ranch," he suggested. "Before Dr. Miller accuses me of overexerting his patient, we have time to figure out the rest." As they left the bakery, Teresa cast one more glance at the building that would soon become her livelihood. It represented everything she had come west to find: independence, opportunity, a fresh start. But now, with Lucas's hand steady at her elbow as he helped her into the buggy, she realized her journey had brought her something she hadn't been looking for, yet somehow needed even more: the possibility of love with a man who respected her dreams as his own. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Teresa's ankle continued to heal and preparations for the bakery moved forward. Lucas made regular trips to Fort Benton, returning with supplies, equipment, and news of their progress. A proper baking oven arrived by steamboat from St. Louis, followed by flour bins, mixing bowls, and display cases crafted by the local carpenter. Teresa began testing recipes in Lucas's kitchen, filling the cabin with the aroma of fresh bread, cinnamon rolls, and apple pies. Mrs. Hollis declared herself an enthusiastic taste tester, while Lucas seemed content to eat whatever Teresa placed before him, praising each creation as if it were the finest he'd ever tasted. "You're going to make me conceited," Teresa laughed one evening as Lucas helped himself to a third slice of cherry pie. "Impossible," he replied around a mouthful. "You're the most humble woman I've ever met, considering your talent." Their courtship progressed alongside the bakery preparations, slow and steady, built on growing trust and mutual respect. Lucas proved to be a thoughtful suitor, bringing Teresa wildflowers from his rides or a book he thought she might enjoy. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch swing he had built for her, talking about their plans or simply enjoying the peaceful Montana sunset together. Sometimes, when Mrs. Hollis had gone home and the night was still, Lucas would kiss her tender at first, then with increasing passion that left Teresa breathless and yearning for more. Yet he always stopped before things went too far, maintaining the boundaries of propriety that both respected. "You're a gentleman, Lucas Westfield," Teresa remarked one such evening, her head resting against his shoulder as they sat by the fire. He chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "Don't sound so surprised. My mother would rise from her grave to haunt me if I treated you with anything less than respect." "It's not that," Teresa assured him, turning to meet his gaze. "It's just, I know men who would have taken advantage considering the circumstances. Me alone at your ranch, dependent on your help." Lucas's expression grew serious. "Is that what you think? That I helped you because I expected something in return?" "No," Teresa said quickly, placing her hand against his cheek. "I know better now. You're a good man, Lucas, the best man I've ever known." The words hung between them, simple but profound in their meaning. Lucas searched her face, then leaned forward to kiss her gently. "I love you, Teresa," he whispered against her lips. "I think I have since the moment I pulled you up from that ravine." Teresa's heart soared at the declaration. "And I love you," she replied, the words coming easily, naturally, as if she'd been waiting to say them all along. "Though I tried not to at first. I was so determined to be independent, to need no one." "You can be independent and still love someone," Lucas said, taking her hands in his. "Your bakery will be yours, your skill, your hard work. My loving you doesn't change that." "I know," Teresa smiled. "That's why I can love you back without fear. You've never once asked me to be less than who I am." They sealed this new understanding with a kiss that promised more: a future together built on mutual respect and deep affection. When Teresa finally retired to her room that night, she felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. She had come west seeking one dream and found another, equally precious, alongside it. The grand opening of Teresa's bakery was set for the first Saturday in October, a perfect autumn day with crisp air and golden sunlight filtering through changing leaves. Lucas had driven Teresa into town the day before to make final preparations, and they had spent the evening arranging displays, checking inventory, and ensuring everything was perfect for the opening. Now, as dawn broke over Fort Benton, Teresa stood in the small apartment above the bakery, gazing out the window at the town coming to life below. In just a few hours, she would open her doors to the public for the first time. Teresa Anderson, bakery proprietor. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Teresa," Lucas called, "are you decent? I've brought coffee." "Come in," she replied, tightening the belt of her robe. Lucas entered, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh biscuits. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in her morning robe, her hair loose around her shoulders, but he recovered quickly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "I thought you might need fortification before the big day," he explained, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "You were up late last night finishing those display cakes." "Thank you," Teresa said, accepting the cup gratefully. "I'm nervous. What if no one comes? What if they don't like my baking?" Lucas laughed, shaking his head. "Have you tasted your own creations? Trust me, they'll come. And once they taste what you can do, they'll be lining up every morning." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you, a good luck gift for opening day." He handed her a small velvet pouch. Curious, Teresa opened it, tipping the contents into her palm, a delicate silver pin shaped like a rolling pin with tiny wheat sheaves on either side. "Lucas, it's beautiful," she breathed, touched by the thoughtful gift. "I had it made in Helena," he explained. "Sent the design to a silversmith there weeks ago. I wanted you to have something special to mark the occasion." Teresa pinned it to her robe, blinking back tears. "I'll wear it today on my apron." Lucas smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "You should get dressed. I'll head downstairs and light the ovens." 2 hours later, everything was ready. Fresh loaves of bread lined the shelves, pastries filled the display cases, and the air was fragrant with the aroma of cinnamon and vanilla. Teresa stood behind the counter, wearing a crisp white apron over a sage green dress, her hair neatly arranged, the silver pin gleaming at her collar. Lucas adjusted the open sign in the window, then turned to her with an encouraging smile. "Ready?" Taking a deep breath, Teresa nodded. "Ready." The first customers arrived minutes after Lucas unlocked the door, a young mother with 2 children, followed by several ranch hands heading to work. Then the milliner from across the street, curious about her new neighbor. Word spread quickly, and soon a steady stream of townspeople filled the small shop, examining the offerings and exchanging coins for paper-wrapped goods. Most were warm and welcoming, congratulating Teresa on the opening and praising her baking after the first bite. A few, whom Teresa recognized as Thornton's associates from their previous visit to town, were more reserved, but even they couldn't resist purchasing something to take home. By noon, the display cases were half empty, and Teresa's cheeks ached from smiling. Lucas had been invaluable, helping serve customers, making change, and ensuring the coffee pot stayed full for those who wanted to enjoy their purchases at one of the small tables by the window. "What did I tell you?" he said during a rare quiet moment, slipping his arm around her waist. "They love it. They love you." Teresa leaned against him briefly, allowing herself a moment of pride. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you, Lucas." The bell over the door jingled, and they separated as more customers entered. The afternoon continued busy, with only a brief lull around 3 o'clock that allowed Teresa to restock the bread shelves with loaves from the second baking of the day. As evening approached and the last customers departed with their purchases, Teresa finally turned the sign to closed and leaned against the door with a sigh of relief. I can't believe we sold almost everything, she marveled, surveying the nearly empty shelves. Told you, Lucas replied, counting the day's earnings at the counter. His grin was triumphant as he announced the total nearly 3 times what Teresa had hoped for on opening day. This calls for a celebration, she declared, untying her apron. Let me change and we can have dinner at the hotel restaurant. My treat. Lucas looked up, his expression suddenly serious. Actually, I had something else in mind for tonight. If you're not too tired, Teresa paused, intrigued by his tone. What did you have in mind? It's a surprise, he said, coming around the counter to take her hands. Just trust me. An hour later, having closed up the bakery and changed into a pretty blue dress at Lucas's request, Teresa found herself once again in his buggy, heading out of town as the sun began to set. But instead of taking the road back to his ranch, Lucas turned onto a less traveled path that wound up into the hills overlooking Fort Benton. Where are we going? Teresa asked, curious as the buggy climbed higher. You'll see, Lucas replied mysteriously, his profile illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. Eventually, they reached a small clearing atop a hill, offering a breathtaking view of the town below and the winding Missouri River beyond. A large pine tree stood at the edge of the clearing, and beneath it, Teresa was surprised to see a blanket spread on the ground, a picnic basket waiting. When did you arrange this? She asked in wonder as Lucas helped her from the buggy. This morning, before you woke up, he admitted. Mrs. Holly's helped with the food. I wanted to do something special to celebrate your first day. The picnic basket contained cold chicken, fresh bread, purchased from her own bakery that morning, cheese, apples, and a bottle of wine that Lucas explained had come upriver on the last steamboat from St. Louis. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the lights of Fort Benton beginning to twinkle below them. It's beautiful up here, Teresa said, leaning back against the tree trunk, wine glass in hand. I've never seen a sunset like this. I discovered this spot my first year here, Lucas explained, sitting beside her. I come up sometimes to think, or just to remind myself why I chose this place to build my life. He looked at her, his expression soft in the fading light. I've never brought anyone else here before. The significance of his words wasn't lost on Teresa. Thank you for sharing it with me, she said quietly, setting down her glass. Lucas was silent for a moment, his gaze on the darkening landscape. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. I came west looking for something I couldn't name, peace, perhaps, or purpose after the war. I found it in the land, in the work, but there was always something missing. He turned to her, taking her hand. Until you fell into that ravine. Teresa smiled at the memory that now seemed so distant. Not my most graceful moment. It was fate, Lucas insisted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You were too heavy to climb out alone, and I happened to have a rope. Are you calling me heavy, Lucas Westfield? Teresa teased, pretending offense. He laughed, shaking his head. I'm saying we needed each other, though neither of us knew it then. His expression grew serious as he reached into his pocket. Teresa, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but when something feels this right, time doesn't seem to matter. Teresa's breath caught as he produced a small box and opened it, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Lucas, she whispered, her heart pounding. I love you, Teresa Anderson, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I love your determination, your kindness, your talent, your smile. I love the way you've brought light and warmth back into my life. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days making you as happy as you've made me. Tears filled Teresa's eyes as Lucas shifted to one knee before her. Teresa, will you marry me? The answer came without hesitation, rising from the deepest part of her heart. "Yes, Lucas. Yes, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. "I wasn't sure if it was too soon," he admitted. "If you'd think I was rushing you. It might seem quick to others," Teresa acknowledged, glancing at the ring that now adorned her hand. "But it feels right to me. As if we've been moving toward this moment since you pulled me from that ravine." They stayed on the hilltop until the stars emerged, talking of their future together, how they would divide their time between the ranch and the bakery, plans for expanding both businesses, dreams of children someday playing in the fields around Lucas's cabin. When the night air grew too chilly, they reluctantly packed up the picnic and headed back to town, where Teresa would spend one more night in the apartment above the bakery before moving her things back to the ranch. As they drove through the quiet streets of Fort Benton, Teresa leaned against Lucas's shoulder, content in a way she had never experienced before. She had come west seeking independence and found it along with a love she hadn't been looking for, but now couldn't imagine living without. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, noticing her contemplative silence. Teresa smiled, looking up at the man who would soon be her husband. "I'm thinking that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. Like falling into a ravine and being rescued by a handsome cowboy with a rope." Lucas laughed, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Best day of my life finding you there," he said simply. "And every day with you has only gotten better." As they continued toward the bakery, Teresa silently agreed. Her journey west had been full of unexpected turns, some challenging, some frightening, but each step had led her here, to this moment, to this man. And whatever adventures lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, their love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them. News of Lucas and Teresa's engagement spread quickly through Fort Benton and the surrounding countryside. Most offered hearty congratulations, though Teresa noticed that Thornton and his associates maintained a cool distance, clearly displeased by the union that would strengthen Lucas's position in the community. Mrs. Hollis was ecstatic, immediately appointing herself wedding planner and insisting that the ceremony be held at the ranch rather than in town. "More romantic," she declared, "and more fitting, since that's where your story began." The wedding was set for mid-November, giving them time to establish the bakery's regular operations and prepare the ranch house for Teresa's permanent arrival. Lucas threw himself into improvements with enthusiasm, adding a larger bedroom window to catch the morning light, as he knew Teresa loved, expanding the kitchen to accommodate her baking experiments, and building a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the cabin. Teresa divided her time between the bakery, which grew more successful with each passing week, and the ranch, where she gradually moved her possessions and helped with the renovations. The work was satisfying, the anticipation sweet, and the stolen moments with Lucas, a kiss in the bakery's kitchen after closing, an embrace under the stars outside the ranch house, all the more precious for their promise of a lifetime together. "Are you nervous, Mrs. Hollis asked one afternoon in early November, as she helped Teresa with final adjustments to her wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace trim, ordered from a dressmaker in Helena. Teresa considered the question as she stood before the mirror. "Not about marrying Lucas," she said honestly. "That feels right in every way. But sometimes I wonder if we can really make it work, the bakery in town, the ranch out here, the distance between them." "Love finds a way," Mrs. Hollis assured her, pinning a section of the hem. "And you two have more love than most couples I've seen in my 63 years. She paused, glancing up at Teresa with a sly smile. "Besides, I have a feeling you'll be spending more time at the ranch soon enough." "What do you mean?" The older woman's eyes twinkled. "Just that married life has a way of bringing certain blessings. Blessings that might make frequent trips to town more difficult for a while." Teresa blushed as she understood Mrs. Hollis's meaning. The thought of Lucas's children brought a warmth to her heart that she hadn't expected. Yes, she had come west seeking independence, but the prospect of creating a family with the man she loved didn't feel like a compromise of that dream. It felt like its fulfillment. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the November air carrying just a hint of the winter to come. Teresa dressed in her room at the ranch, assisted by Mrs. Hollis and Elizabeth, Lucas's sister, who had arrived from Helena the day before with her husband and children. "My brother hasn't stopped smiling since you agreed to marry him," Elizabeth commented as she arranged Teresa's hair, weaving small white flowers into the dark tresses. "It's good to see him happy again. After the war, and then the trouble with Thornton, I worried he'd never find peace." "He's given me so much," Teresa replied softly. "I only hope I can make him as happy as he's made me." "Oh, I think you already have," Elizabeth assured her, stepping back to admire her work. "Perfect. Lucas won't know what hit him when he sees you walking toward him." Outside, the ranch had been transformed. Lanterns hung from tree branches. Chairs were arranged in neat rows facing an arch covered with autumn foliage and late-blooming wildflowers. Nearly everyone from Fort Benton had made the journey out to the ranch, along with neighboring ranchers and their families. As the ceremony began, Teresa stood at the edge of the gathering, her arm linked with Judge Hammond's, who had offered to give her away in her father's absence. Music from a fiddle and guitar filled the air, a sweet, simple melody that carried across the golden landscape. And then she saw Lucas, waiting for her beneath the arch, his tall figure straight and proud in his best suit, his eyes finding hers across the distance between them. The love in his gaze was so tangible it seemed to create a physical connection, drawing her toward him with each step. The vows were traditional but spoken with deeply personal meaning, promises to love, honor, and cherish, to stand together through all of life's joys and challenges. When Lucas slipped the gold band onto Teresa's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain as he pledged his life to hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Hammond declared, beaming at the couple. "Lucas, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet still conveying the depth of their feelings. As they turned to face their guests, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Westfield, Teresa felt a sense of rightness that confirmed every decision that had led her to this moment. The celebration continued into the evening, food and drink flowing freely, music inspiring dancing under the stars, congratulations offered from all sides. Even Edward Thornton made an appearance, arriving late and keeping his distance but raising his glass in a silent toast when Lucas caught his eye across the gathering. "A peace offering?" Teresa asked, noticing the exchange. Lucas shrugged, his arm secure around her waist. "Perhaps. Or just acknowledgement that he couldn't stop this, couldn't stop us." As the night deepened and guests began to depart, Lucas led Teresa away from the festivities, toward a stand of trees lit with lanterns where a small table had been set with champagne and 2 glasses. "I wanted a moment alone with my wife before we rejoined the celebration," he explained, pouring the sparkling liquid and handing her a glass. "To us, Teresa Westfield, to our future together." "To us," she echoed, touched by the gesture and by the sound of her new name on his lips. Lucas set down his glass and took hers, placing it beside his own on the table. Then he drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion he had restrained during the public ceremony, deep and thorough, his hands tangling in her hair, disrupting Elizabeth's careful arrangement. "I've been wanting to do that all day," he murmured against her lips when they finally parted for breath. "Just that," Teresa teased, her arms around his neck, her body pressed against the solid warmth of his. Lucas laughed, the sound low and promising. "No, Mrs. Westfield, not just that. But the rest will have to wait until our guests have gone home and we're truly alone." Heat flooded Teresa's cheeks at the implication, but she smiled up at him, love and anticipation mingling in her gaze. "Then perhaps we should encourage them to leave soon." "My thoughts exactly," Lucas agreed, stealing one more kiss before offering his arm to escort her back to the celebration. It was well past midnight when the last guests departed, leaving the newlyweds standing on the porch of their home, waving goodbye as the final wagon disappeared down the road. Mrs. Hollies had left earlier, after ensuring the kitchen was stocked with food for the next day and giving Teresa a knowing hug that made her blush all over again. Now, as silence settled around them, broken only by the distant call of a night bird and the soft rustling of wind through the trees, Lucas turned to his wife with a smile that made her heart skip. "Welcome home, Mrs. Westfield," he said softly, before sweeping her into his arms and carrying her across the threshold into their cabin, into the beginning of their life together. The months that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. Winter descended on Montana territory, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. The bakery continued to thrive, with Teresa traveling into Fort Benton 3 days a week while Lucas managed the ranch. On bakery days, he would drive her into town before dawn, then return in the evening to bring her home, often staying to help with the closing tasks. Their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm, each supporting the other's work while building their life together. Evenings were spent by the fire, planning for the future, sharing stories, or simply enjoying the peaceful companionship they had found in each other. Nights were for whispered words of love and the discovery of each other's bodies, an intimacy that deepened with each passing day. In late January, as a blizzard howled outside the cabin windows, Teresa discovered that Mrs. Hollies' prediction had come true. The signs had been there for weeks: her unusual fatigue, certain foods suddenly turning her stomach, the tenderness in her breasts, but it wasn't until her monthly cycle failed to appear for the second time that she was certain. She waited until evening to share the news, serving Lucas his favorite apple pie after dinner and watching nervously as he ate, oblivious to her anticipation. "Is something on your mind, Teresa?" he finally asked, noticing her distraction. "You've barely touched your pie." Teresa set down her fork, her heart pounding. "I have something to tell you, Lucas." She reached across the table for his hand. "Something wonderful, I hope." Lucas's expression grew concerned. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Teresa squeezed his hand and simply said, "We're going to have a baby. In late summer, I think." For a moment, Lucas stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then, as the news registered, his face transformed with a joy so profound it brought tears to Teresa's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We're going to be parents," Teresa nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "Yes, are you pleased?" In answer, Lucas rose from his chair and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Pleased?" he echoed, looking down at her with wonder. "Teresa, I don't even have words for what I'm feeling right now." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child, our family." He kissed her then, pouring all his happiness and love into the gesture. When they parted, both were laughing and crying at once, overcome with emotion. "I love you," Lucas whispered, cradling her face in his hands. So much. And I love you, Teresa replied, feeling truly complete in a way she had never imagined possible. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Lucas's arm protective around her waist, his hand splayed over her stomach where their child grew, Teresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrifying fall into Rattlesnake Ravine to the safety of Lucas's arms, from the solitary pursuit of independence to the discovery that true freedom could be found in loving and being loved, every step had been necessary. Every challenge a pathway to this profound happiness. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured sleepily, his lips brushing against her shoulder. Teresa smiled into the darkness, her hand covering his where it rested on her stomach. "I'm thinking that sometimes life takes unexpected turns," she said softly. "And sometimes those turns lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Lucas pulled her closer, his breathing deepening as he drifted toward sleep. "Like a ravine and a rope," he mumbled, his words slurring slightly. "Yes," Teresa agreed, closing her eyes and letting herself be lulled by the sound of his heartbeat. "Exactly like that." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in peaceful white. But inside the warmth of their cabin, Teresa and Lucas Westfield slept soundly, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of the future they would build together, a future that had begun with a fall, a rescue, and the discovery of a love neither had been looking for but both had desperately needed. The end of winter brought renewal to the Montana landscape, snow melting to reveal tender green shoots, birds returning to nest in the trees around the ranch, calves being born in the pastures. As nature awakened from its hibernation, Teresa's body changed too, her stomach gradually rounding with the growing life inside her. Lucas became even more protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous tasks at the bakery and hiring a young woman from town, Jenny Miller, to assist during the busy morning hours so Teresa could rest more. Initially, Teresa had resisted these changes, determined to maintain her independence despite her pregnancy. But as her body grew heavier and more unwieldy, she came to appreciate the help, especially as the summer heat intensified. By July, her trips to town had reduced to once weekly, with Jenny managing daily operations under Teresa's guidance. The arrangement worked well. The bakery continued to thrive, and Teresa had time to prepare for the baby's arrival, setting up a nursery in the small room adjacent to their bedroom, sewing tiny garments, and reading every book on childrearing she could find. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. His hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of their active child. "Mrs. Hollies is convinced it's a boy," Teresa replied with a smile. "She says I'm carrying low, which is a sure sign according to her grandmother's wisdom." Lucas chuckled. "And what do you think?" Teresa considered the question, her hand joining his on her stomach. "I don't know. Sometimes I think boy, sometimes girl. Mostly I just pray for a healthy child with your kind heart. And your determination," Lucas added, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though perhaps not your tendency to fall into ravines." Teresa laughed, leaning into his embrace. "That only happened once, and it brought me to you, so I can't regret it." The baby arrived in mid-August, a robust boy with Lucas's dark hair and Teresa's blue eyes, born after a long but uncomplicated labor with Mrs. Hollies and the town midwife in attendance. Lucas had paced outside for hours, only entering when the midwife finally called him to meet his son. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held the tiny bundle for the first time. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother." They named him Samuel James Westfield, Samuel after Teresa's father, James after Lucas's. From his first day, he proved to be a good-natured baby, strong and healthy with a hearty appetite and a tendency to smile often, especially at the sound of his father's voice. Life settled into a new rhythm with Samuel at its center. The bakery continued under Jenny's capable management, with Teresa making occasional visits to check on operations and introduce customers to the newest Westfield. Lucas balanced his ranch work with helping care for his son, proudly carrying Samuel in a sling across his chest as he did chores around the property. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mrs. Hollies remarked one afternoon, watching Lucas rock the baby to sleep while humming a soft lullaby. Lucas Westfield, feared by cattle rustlers and bank managers alike, completely undone by 8 pounds of baby. Teresa smiled, understanding exactly what the older woman meant. There was something profoundly moving about seeing her strong, capable husband so gentle with their son, so openly adoring of the tiny life they had created together. As Samuel grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the Westfield family thrived. The ranch expanded, with Lucas purchasing adjacent land to increase his herd. The bakery became known as the finest in 3 counties, with travelers going out of their way to sample Teresa's creations during their journeys through Fort Benton. And Edward Thornton, perhaps recognizing the futility of his grudge against a man whose standing in the community grew stronger with each passing year, eventually extended an olive branch in the form of a business proposal, financing for a larger cattle operation that would benefit both Lucas's ranch and Thornton's bank. After careful consideration and lengthy discussions with Teresa, Lucas accepted, turning an old enemy into a cautious business associate. "Life is too short for lasting enmities," Lucas explained when Teresa questioned his decision. "And this benefits our family's future. Samuel will have a larger inheritance one day because of this partnership." Teresa had to admit the logic of his reasoning, though she remained wary of Thornton's motives. However, as the years passed and the arrangement proved profitable for all involved, her concerns eased. The banker even became something of a regular at the bakery, developing a particular fondness for Teresa's cinnamon rolls that seemed to soften his formerly stern demeanor. When Samuel was 3, a sister joined the family, Elizabeth Rose Westfield, named for Lucas's sister and Teresa's mother. Unlike her easygoing brother, Elizabeth arrived in a hurry and announced her presence with lusty cries that suggested a strong personality from the start. "She's going to keep us on our toes, this one," Mrs. Hollies predicted, watching the tiny girl wave her fists in protest at being swaddled. "Mark my words, she'll be climbing trees and racing horses before you know it." Lucas laughed, cradling his daughter with the practiced ease of an experienced father. "As long as she stays away from ravines, I can handle anything else." Teresa, exhausted but radiant after the birth, smiled up at her husband and children, her family, her heart, her home. "Our family is complete now," she said softly. "Perfect." Lucas leaned down to kiss her, his eyes full of the love that had only deepened over their years together. "Perfect," he agreed. "Though if another little one comes along someday, I wouldn't complain." Teresa rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress her smile. "Let me recover from this one first, Cowboy." As it happened, their family would grow once more 3 years later with the arrival of twin boys Jonathan Lucas and William Thomas Westfield, completing the Westfield brood, and ensuring that the ranch and bakery would never lack for helping hands as the children grew. Through it all, the joys and challenges of marriage, the exhaustion and exhilaration of parenthood, the continued growth of their businesses, Lucas and Teresa remained each other's strength and solace. Their love, born in the unlikeliest of circumstances at the edge of a ravine, only deepened with each passing year, each shared experience binding them more tightly together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Teresa by taking her back to the hilltop where he had proposed, now accessible by a proper road he had built specifically for the occasion. A small cabin stood on the clearing, a private retreat he had constructed in secret over the preceding months, with help from friends and neighbors sworn to secrecy. "This is for us," he explained as he led her through the simple but comfortable space, furnished with a bed, table, chairs, and a small stove. "Somewhere we can escape to when we need time alone, away from the children and the work and the responsibilities." Teresa turned to him, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she said, echoing the word that had come to define their life together. "Thank you." As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in colors no artist could fully capture, Lucas and Teresa stood on the cabin's small porch, his arms around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. Below them, Fort Benton nestled along the river, and beyond, their ranch spread across the rolling hills, the two places that had become home, connected by their love and their journey together. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Westfield," Lucas murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "These have been the best 10 years of my life." Teresa turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome, though now lined at the eyes and mouth from years of sun and laughter. "And mine," she replied softly. "I'm so glad I fell into that ravine." Lucas laughed, the sound as warm and rich as it had been the day they met. "And I'm so glad I had a rope to pull you up." As night fell and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Teresa and Lucas Westfield retired to their anniversary cabin, secure in the love they had built together, a love as strong and enduring as the rope that had first joined them, as vast and beautiful as the western landscape that had become their home. From an unexpected beginning at the edge of a ravine had grown a life filled with purpose, joy, and the deepest kind of love, a love that would continue to sustain them through all the years to come.